Good evening. My name is Carl Brown, and I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church. This is my home, my yard, and we are here tonight for another backyard Bible study. So if you would like to take notes, why don't you get you a paper and pencil, or whatever it is you take notes on, get your Bible, and let's get into the Word. Last week we started our study on Judges, and we did chapters 1 through 5 of Judges, and we got into this pattern that the Israelites get into. As soon as Joshua died, they would disobey, and they would start worshiping idols. They didn't clear out all the people out of the land, and so they would worship these idols and the gods of these other peoples that stayed there. And then we find that they intermarried with them and intermingled with them, and they started to corrupt their culture that God had established with them of worshiping Him and the way of righteousness. And so they were pulling them away from the one true God. And they would do that, and then God would judge them to remind them of their promise and of their covenant, and also to punish them for their sin. And when that happened, when they were taken over by a foreign country or a different tribe, they would be slaves, or there'd be servitude to them. They would cry out to the Lord, and He would give them a deliverer and a leader, and they called them judges. So far we've covered, I think, 4 judges that there were, and there were 3 men and 1 woman, and Deborah was the last judge we covered. And every time God gave them a leader, gave them a judge, they would deliver them from whatever they were going through at the time, and then God would give them peace for a number of years. And then they would start the whole pattern all over again. And so that's where we ended from last week. And this week we're going to cover the life of Gideon and his legacy, which starts in chapter 6 of Judges. It begins right after the song that Deborah sang, and when she was judge, and they had their victory, and then they had peace for 40 years. And we start verse 1 of chapter 6 on the life of Gideon. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. For 7 years He gave them into the hands of the Midianites, because the power of the Midian was so oppressive. The Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever Israel planted their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel. Neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like a swarm of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. What we have here is a situation where they sinned again before the Lord. The Lord allows these Midianites to come in. Now, the Midianites sound like a bunch of nomads, that they were travelers, like gypsies, or like the Huns were, because they would come in with their tents, and they would camp, and they had all their camels, and they had all their animals, and they would just come in at different times of the year, and they oppressed the Israelites. Now, they oppressed them badly, because it said that they were making places for themselves to live in mountain clefts and caves. So the Israelites saw them coming, and they would go hide. And for however long the Midianites were around, they would live in hiding. They were hiding everything from them. And the Midianites, it said that they came and they were ravaging the land, that they didn't allow the animals they found to live, that they didn't let the crops stay. They would eat what they wanted and destroy the rest. So they were just ravaging the land, and when they leave, there was nothing left, and the Israelites had nothing, and so they were impoverished, and it was terrible. And everything they did in fear, and they did in thought of these Midianites. Are they coming? Are they right around the corner? Are they going to be here today? Because when they come, there's so many, and they just are so terrible. That's the situation. And so they're so desperate, they finally cry out to the Lord again. Again, repeating this pattern, realizing that their fault is in themselves, not in the Midianites, but it's in themselves, that they had left their Lord, and when they left their Lord, they lost His protection. So what happens in verse 7? When the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, I told you so. That's really what he says. The prophet of the Lord said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. Wow. Doesn't God come across like a parent right there? He is our Heavenly Father. But sometimes fathers have to give us the stern word. Sometimes they have to give us the talking to. Sometimes they have to give us the spanking. God's coming across right here is with a, I told you so. This is exactly what I said was going to happen. This has already happened 3-4 times already, and it's going to happen again because you're refusing to worship me and you're prostituting yourself with these other gods, and you've left me. So you're serving them, let them save you. You've left me. It's a pretty harsh word. But after that word from the Lord, he immediately makes a plan for their redemption, because even in his great fatherly love of discipline, he also has the fatherly love of compassion and mercy and grace for his people. And so they cried out to him. And what father is not going to listen when his children cry? When his children cry out in desperation. Our Heavenly Father is no different. When we cry out to him in desperation, he hears us. He's listening. And he may be stern with us, but that is underlined by love and compassion and mercy. The angel of the Lord came down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Well, here we have another Christophany. I mean, this book's full of them, isn't it? And we have Jesus appearing again in the Old Testament as the angel of the Lord. The proof of that, once again, comes from the way that he talks, the verbiage that he uses. He doesn't talk on the behalf of God. He talks as he is God, as he is the Lord. I. And you'll see that in the way he talks here. But I love how he comes up to Gideon. And this is just, to me, this is great. He comes up to Gideon in Ophrah, and Gideon says was threshing wheat in a wine press. Now, when they threshed wheat, they used to just thresh wheat over a piece of wood or on a rock and get all the wheat and separate it from the tares, and just do that work out in the open. But not Gideon. Gideon's threshing it in a wine press, which is, a vat that they would put all the grapes in, and they would dance on tops of the grapes. You've probably seen that. But they're down and they're pressing the grapes down to where it would get the juice out from the grapes. But it's a vat that they get into. So he's down hiding in this vat, thrashing wheat in a wine press, hiding from the Midianites in a cowardly fashion. And God says, the Lord says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. I wonder the thought that must have went through Gideon's mind when the Lord called him mighty warrior, because right here he's everything but a mighty warrior. And the Lord knew that. And so the Lord was in some way, somehow, kind of giving him a hint of the direction that he wants Gideon to go. How does Gideon respond to this? Gideon responds with a little bit of sass. And let's look at this right here. He says, but sir, verse 13, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hand of Midian. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to talk to the Lord like that. Now, did Gideon know that this was the angel of the Lord at the moment? Did he know that this was Jesus incarnate? Did he know that he was looking face to face with God at this particular moment? No, I don't think he did. And we'll see that as we keep reading. But he just threw out a bunch of stuff out there. Well, who is this God? You know, how can you say the Lord's with us when I'm standing here in a wine press threshing my wheat just because I want us to have some bread tonight instead of the Midianites coming in and destroying everything? How can you say he's with us? This is not the land of milk and honey like we were told it was supposed to be. This is not the God that we were told about that did all these wonders. So basically, Gideon is not impressed when he said the Lord is with you, and not overwhelmed by it. And just the mighty warrior thing just goes right over his head. But here's the great thing about the Lord. He's not threatened by Gideon coming at him with questions, with doubt, with his cynicism, and just, I don't know, his attitude. That didn't threaten the Lord. Look how he responds. I love how he responds. Verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" There you go. It's the Lord. "But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together." I will be with you. I think Gideon's getting an idea of who this is. He says, "How can I do this? I'm not even the firstborn in my house, and my house is certainly not a great house in Manasseh, and Manasseh is not a great tribe. I mean, shouldn't you be looking at Judah? They got all the big guys over there." No. God says, "I'm looking at you." He's not asking Gideon to go beyond his ability, but he is asking him to use the ability that he does have, and then God will work through him. That's a big difference. So Gideon's getting an inkling of what's going on here, but he can't get past all of his doubt. And Gideon says, "I want a sign, and let me go get something. Let me go prepare something, and if you won't mind, just wait here." What kind of patience the Lord must have. I mean, he's the Lord. And Gideon's telling him to wait around. And he had to wait a while because Gideon went and he prepared a young goat. And then he made bread without yeast. And he put the meat in a broth. So not only did he go cook and prepare a meal, he had to prepare the meat before the meal and prepare the bread. So he was gone a while. And the Lord stayed there patiently waiting for him. And he brought back this meat in a pot and in a broth and offered it to the Lord, who was sitting under that same oak tree. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and place them on this rock and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. With the tip of the staff that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire flared up from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. That's a sign. Gideon asked for a sign. Gideon had a problem with lack of faith. And as we've already talked about, he was kind of a coward. So he wasn't strong and courageous. And so he asked for a sign to help stir up his strength, to stir up his faith. And God knew that. The Lord knew that. And the Lord gave him a sign by consuming the meat with fire from his staff and then disappearing before his eyes, showing his supernatural divine ability. And then he finally realized what was going on, and he says, When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Ah, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, so he can't see him, but he can hear him. The Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You're not going to die." I think this is a beautiful moment for Gideon. I think Gideon went from a place from fear to faith. And I'm not going to say that his faith sustained him, but in this moment, he went from fear of the Midianites, fear and doubt, and quite frankly, bad attitude and cynicism, to faith and awe and reverence for the Lord. And so I think this is a beautiful moment in the life of Gideon. And quite frankly, he may not have been a believer in the Lord until this moment. Gideon's lack of faith or lack of courage or whatever, none of that surprised the Lord. He wanted to use Gideon the way that he was. He said, "In the strength that you have, go and do what I've asked you to do." And what did he say after that? He says, "I'll be with you. I'll be with you." I think that this is our first great truth that we need to learn tonight. God only asks us to use what we're given. He doesn't ask us to be someone else and to use talents and gifts that are not ours already. The Lord wants us to just use what He has given us, the talents and the skills and the knowledge and the faith that we do have. And then He's going to do the rest through us. That's a lesson for our life. Use what you have been given to do what God has asked you to do, and let God work and live through you. He is with you. That's a great lesson. Let's continue on. Verse 25 says, "That same night the Lord said to him, 'Take a bull, the second bull, from your father's herd.'" Intimate knowledge of Gideon God is showing here. "The second bull from your herd, one was 7 years old, and tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asteroth Pole beside it." Now, what are these things? Now, Baal was a very popular god, just like Ra was a popular god to the Egyptians. Baal was the most popular god that was worshipped in the area that they were in, of the Canaanites and the Amorites. It was a god of fertility, a god of the rain, that kind of thing. And Asteroth was a goddess. And so they had an altar to Baal, which required sacrifice. And Baal, some worshipers of Baal even sacrificed their children on these altars. And then the Asteroth Pole was like a totem pole that we would see in Native America. It was this large pole that they would have, and they had the image of Asteroth on it somewhere, and they would dance around this pole and they would worship this goddess Asteroth from this pole. And so we see these several times in Scripture, that these other religious things keep popping up, and imagery and idols, and the Lord has told him to take it down. But here we get back to the bravery of this mighty warrior Gideon. He didn't tear it down during the day. No, he got some help, and he took it down in the middle of the night because he didn't want anybody to know that he did it. And so he tore down the offering to Baal, the altar to Baal, and the Asteroth Pole in the middle of the night and got rid of it. And in the morning, the men of the town got up, and they were not happy about it. And they said, "Who did this?" And then when they carefully investigated, verse 29, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did it." Then the men of the town demanded of Joash, "Bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asteroth Pole beside it." All right, well, I told you how your Heavenly Father will step in for you. Joash steps in for Gideon here. And now this is Joash's altar to Baal. This is Joash's Asteroth Pole. Do not know that Joash is a believer, But Joash does know that it was his son who tore it down, and he tore down the altar bell. And I imagine that his son, who used his bull to make this offering, he told him about his encounter with the Lord. Did Joash believe? I think he might have believed at this point, and I'll tell you why. Because this is where he defends his son. So Joash says, "Why are you trying to defend Baal? Isn't Baal a god? Can't he defend himself? If he tore these things down and Baal was offended, then let Baal deal with him." And so the people relented, and they called Gideon Jerubbaal. After that, Jerubbaal. After that was his name, and all the people called Gideon either Gideon or Jerubbaal, and you'll see them both in the Bible a lot, because Jerubbaal means let Baal contend, or let Baal deal with him. And then Gideon blew a trumpet, summoning all the people to follow him. And he sent messages throughout Manasseh, calling to them to arms, and into Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali. So they all went up to meet him. So Gideon rides out on this trumpet. Rides out on a trumpet. That'd be a short trip. I see in my head Gideon riding around either on a donkey or a horse, blowing his trumpet, and they had some kind of signal. Now I'm wondering if this signal, obviously they use trumpets for signals. I'm wondering if they had a signal for them to all run to their caves and run to their clefts to hide from the Midianites, and then another signal to call them to arms, and another one for peace or whatever. But they all recognized this signal from the trumpet, and the people came. It's really kind of interesting to me, especially as a trumpet player. I'm just saying it's very interesting. But after all the people come together, Gideon has still got a kernel of doubt. Well, no, he's got a lot of doubt, and he's still having trouble with his faith in his own abilities and their ability to take on the Midianites. And there's a good reason for that. Because there are 135,000 Midianites gathered together to go to war against them. 135,000. I got the opportunity to go see Alabama play LSU a few years ago in a home game. And there were 110,000 people in this stadium. Can you imagine that 110,000 people with their camels and their horses and their donkeys and all their provisions and their campfires and their tents, and they're all spread out? If you spread them all out across a field, that's an immense number of people. And how many people did Gideon have? When he blew that trumpet, he had 32,000 people come to him. Now, 32,000 people is a lot of people. But it is not near 135,000 people. Think about the odds. That's 4.5 to 1. They have 4.5 guys for every one of Gideon's men, and they seem to be regular warriors, and Gideon's men seem to not be. They're used to living in fear and have been scared for their life for several years. So Gideon has this lack of faith. He asked God for a very unique sign. And verses 36 is where it starts, and it goes to the end of chapter 6. He basically has this fleece. He has this, I don't know if it's like a fleece cloth or a fleece jacket or just a fleece that you would throw in the back of a donkey for a saddle blanket. But he has this fleece material, and he puts it out in the yard. He says, "Lord, if you would just give me another sign, just give me some more confidence as I'm about to go into this battle. I'm throwing out this fleece." Now, you've probably heard this in our pop jargon or our lingo that we use today. We say throwing a fleece out. When someone says they're throwing a fleece out, they're referring to this very story, to where they're kind of testing the Lord. They're asking for a sign. They're throwing their fleece out. Well, Gideon threw this fleece out, and he said, "Lord, I would really love it as if the fleece was soaking wet in the morning, and all the dew was on the fleece, and there was no dew on the ground. It's just dry as a bone everywhere else, and all the dew is on the fleece. It'd be a miracle, right? It'd be a miraculous thing. Well, the Lord, in His patience and in His desire to help give him confidence and complete this task through Gideon, knowing his lack of faith, He did it for him. The next morning he got up, all the ground was dry, and the fleece was soaking wet, and he could wring it out. That's not enough for Gideon. He says, oh, just one more time, God. One more time, let me just ask for one more favor. Don't be angry with me. He says, this time I'm going to put the same fleece out this time, Lord, just to make sure. This time, could the fleece be dry and all the ground be wet? And so the Lord granted that request, and the next morning the fleece was dry and all the ground was covered with dew, and there's not a drop in the fleece. So right now the Lord is giving Gideon 3 signs. He gave him the disappearance with the meat going up in flame from his staff. He gave him the fleece, the 2 fleece experiences. He's given them 3 signs, and he's told them, I'm going to be with you. And he says, come on, Gideon, get together. We're going to do this together, you and me. It's me and you. So Gideon calls with his trumpet, riding around on his donkey. 32,000 men come to him, and that had to make him feel pretty good, because 4.5 to 1 is bad odds, but it's a lot better than what he thought he was going to have to deal with. But then we see in verse 2 of chapter 7, the Lord said to Gideon, that's you have too many. You have too many for me to deliver to Midian into your hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me, that her own strength has saved her. Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. God says it's too many. No. 32,000. No, I'm not going to deal with that. No, I don't like that. I don't like those odds. 4.5 to 1 is too close. The people won't turn to me, and they won't believe in me if it's that close. They're just going to brag about their great victory if they get the victory with those kind of odds. So you tell everybody who's scared, everybody who's shaking in their boots, you tell everybody who's scared to leave. And I think it's interesting that when he told everybody who's scared to leave, that 22,000 left. Because usually when you get men around other men and they're come there for the business of soldiering, they try to act strong. They try to act tough. They're like, oh man, yeah, we're going to take them. We got this. Nope. 22,000 of them said, bye-bye. I'll leave. Yeah, if you want to scare people, I'll go. And didn't care at all that they were running with the tail between their legs. They left. So now there's just 10,000 left, and the odds have totally changed. And Gideon had to just go ash in the face, because now he's looking at 13.5 to 1 odds. And that's significantly different when they're coming into a battle situation. But what does the Lord say then? In verse 4, he said, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. And so he takes them down to the water, these 10,000 men. He says, all right, now listen, if they go to one knee and they cup the water in their hands and they lap it while they're looking around, sort of like they're expecting something to happen and they're kind of wary, keep them. But if they go all the way down and they just kind of on all fours get down and they put their face in the water to drink, get rid of them. What's amazing to me is how few people actually cup their hands for the water. It got rid of 9,700 more men, and there are only 300 left. So now we have Gideon and 300 men. And you know what God says? That's right. That's good. That's a good number right there. That's much better odds. I like those odds. The odds are now 450 to 1. He said, I can work with that. now we know that if I get the victory, if I give you the victory, that the people will turn to me and they will worship me. And so the Lord knows what he's doing, and he certainly didn't want Gideon to take too much credit or anybody to take much credit for it, because now he's got 300 men going against 135,000. So it says in verse 8 of chapter 7, so Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of the others. Now this is an interesting note I want you to keep in mind for later. So he took the trumpets and the provisions for the others. Did everybody have a trumpet? I don't think everybody had a trumpet. And this really comes into play in the next few verses. Usually, when you divided up troops, you would divide a troop up into thousands and hundreds and tens. And that we still kind of do that today. They're needing, we'll see in just a minute, 300 trumpets, and which means that they had 300 trumpets. Well, if they had 300 trumpets, that means that they had a trumpet for every 100 men. So they were used to using those trumpets, the different calls, to tell the men to do what they need to do in battle. And so they took all their trumpets. All right. Keep that right there. Tuck that away. We're going to get right back to that. So the Lord says, I'm going to give you one more sign. If you truly want to see that I'm with you and that I've got you and that this is going to go the way I tell you it's going to go, sneak into the camp and you'll see for yourself. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling his friend about his dream. He said, I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, and it struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, the other soldier, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped God and returned to camp of Israel and called out, get up! This is Gideon's final sign. When he goes into this immense camp and he hears that this one guy has a dream and the other guy interprets the dream as the sword of Gideon, the Lord has given the Midianites into the hand of Gideon, son of Joash. And he's like, they even know my name. It gave him such courage. He knew that the Lord was going to fight for them. And I believe this was Gideon's best moment. Gideon believed and was encouraged and acted all at once. He believed, he was encouraged, and he acted. He went right back to the camp. He told them to get up. And he got the 300 guys up. And it's really kind of interesting what happens. He gives them all a trumpet. He gives them all a jar, and all of them a torch in the jar. So they're carrying a trumpet in one hand. They've got a torch with a jar on top of it with the other. I don't know how they're carrying it, but they kind of got it there. And the torch, I assume, was already lit, but it was in the jar, so it could only shine at their feet. No one could see them coming. And so as they went out. So Gideon says in verse 17, watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the enemy camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. All right, well, I don't think he should have thrown that and for Gideon in there, but some reason he did. Whether he threw and for Gideon because Gideon was, because the guys said they were scared of Gideon and that the Lord had given it to the camp, or if he was beginning to turn a little bit prideful already about his victory, I don't know, and about him being in charge. We do see that later, but this may be the turning, this may be when it began to turn. He said, so you're going to shout for the Lord and for Gideon. They divide them into three groups, three groups of 100, and they surrounded the camp. When they got to where they surrounded the camp, They blew their trumpets as loud as they could. They smashed their jars, which exposed all their torches. And they said, for the Lord and for Gideon. Now, didn't I tell you to keep in mind that usually a trumpet signified 100 or 1,000 men? Well, if you're in the camp of the Midianites and you don't hear one trumpet, you don't hear 4 trumpets, you don't hear 5 trumpets, but you hear 300 trumpets blowing all at once and the yells of all of them going for the Lord and for Gideon, it sounds like every single one of those trumpets and every single person that's yelling and all that crashing of stuff sounds like they represent 1,000 people, and it scares them to death. They think that they're outnumbered. They think that they're surrounded. And what happens? They even turn on themselves in their own confusion, and they start killing each other. And Gideon's 300 is able to send them in a rout, and they just take off. And Gideon and his 300 pursue them. It's such a maddening thing to look at, to think that a commander could be that confused. And you know it's obviously a God thing, because you've got 135,000 people running one direction, or a portion of that, and 300 people chasing them and striking them down. And they never look back and go, hey, there's only 300 of them. We got this. Let's turn around and charge them. Never happens. They chase them and they chase them. And as they chase them, Gideon actually calls out to the surrounding neighborhoods of people, of Israelites, and says, hey, come help us pursue these people. And they're encouraged by the fact that Gideon's winning, so they come out and they help them. And they're pursuing and attacking all the different Midianites. All right, so now we see things begin to turn a little bit for Gideon. He has defeated them, and they're en route, and they're chasing them. And we're in chapter 8, and we're in verse 4. It says, Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Succoth, give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I am still pushing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. So here comes Gideon and his 300 men. They're exhausted. They've been chasing these guys all day. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they're tired, and they just need a little bit of refreshment where they can keep up the work. But the officials of Succoth said, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops? Then Gideon replied, just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars. So I kind of get it, what Succoth is going through here. You see Gideon and his ragtag band of 300 guys, and they're all tired, and you just saw thousands of soldiers go by that they're chasing, thousands of them. And we'll see here in a minute, 120 have already died, but they still have 15,000 troops that the 300 are chasing. And the men of Succoth are like, I don't know, I'm not sure which side to take here. I mean, if I take your side and give you, then they're going to come back and they're going to destroy all of us. So we're not helping you. And which is really sad, really. I would hope that we would never act that way, because they were their brothers. They were Israelites. They were fighting for the Lord. But these guys did not. They were beaten down. They were They lived in fear of those Midianites. So they didn't help them. So from there, Gideon went up to Peniel and made the same request to them, and they answered as the men of Succoth had. So he told them, when I come back, I'm going to tear down this tower. They had a large central tower that was kind of their stronghold that they would hide in when the Midianites would come. And so he had this tower. He said, when I come back, I'm tearing that down. You bunch of cowards. I'm sorry. Why is that funny to me? It's funny to me that Gideon would think of these other people as cowardly when it took 4 miracles and a direct conversation with God for him to have the courage to attack himself. So, a coward calling someone else a coward is just kind of kind of a hard thing. But again, he was doing the Lord's work, and I wish they would have stepped up, but they didn't. Well, what happens? He chases the rest of these two kings down and the rest of their men, and he destroys them, and he brings them back. And this is where things kind of get ugly with Gideon. Then Gideon came out and said in verse 15 to the men of Succoth, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give you bread to your exhausted men?" So he took the elders of the town, and he taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He took these guys and he stripped them and he spanked them in front of everybody, or whipped them, I don't know. To me, it's like he spanked them. It says he taught them a lesson. So it's like he took these thorn bushes and he spanked them or switched them in front of everybody. Did you ever get switched with a thorn bush? With a I remember that happened to me one time. I remember when I was little and my mom would send me out to go get my own switch. Did you ever have to do that? It's terrible. I learned the hard way about a lot of things. One, don't get a willow branch, because just because they're tiny doesn't mean they don't hurt. Woo! Those things will leave a welt. But we knew if we came in with a puny switch, the mom was going to go out and get a good one herself. And I don't remember when it was, but I remember one time a switch that I had brought in or whatever, I didn't realize it had thorns on it. That's the worst. Wow, that's stuff. And then these guys were switched just like that in front of all the people. He taught them a lesson. He kept his word. Well, he didn't stop there. Remember the men of Peniel? He went over there, and they all ran up into their tower, and he brought down their tower, and he killed all the men of the town. That's terrible. But he kept his word. He said he was going to do it. He came back, and he tore down that tower, and he killed the men of the town. And that's a terrible thing. Here's the lesson I think you want to learn from that. I mean, there are several. Gideon came through, and he was tired. He was hungry. His men were tired. They were hungry. They needed refreshment. When we are tired and we are hungry, we can get grumpy and selfish and petty, and we don't make the best spiritual decisions at those times. And we can say things that will get us into a heap of trouble later. We want to be sure we don't say anything in those situations and make some grander mistakes, or get caught in saying something that we regret later, just like Gideon did. He said this, and then he came back, and he's still tired and grumpy, and he fulfilled his promise to them, and with some in kind of a in your face kind of way. And he didn't make any friends doing it, for sure, and I'm not sure it was sanctioned by the Lord. And he took total credit for that. It was a pride thing. His pride was wounded. My mom used to say, one of the most spiritual things you can do when you're really tired is take a nap. After he does this, he approaches these men, these two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he asks Zebah and Zalmunna, he says, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one with the bearing of a prince." So they're trying to flatter Gideon here by saying he looks like a prince. He's a man of great bearing. But what they don't realize is that the people they had killed at Tabor were Gideon's brothers and other Israelites. And it turns on them. Gideon replied, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." And then he says, he turns to Jethro, his oldest son, and said, "Kill them." But Jethro did not draw his sword, because he was only a boy and was afraid. And Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Come, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off of their camels' necks. So now Gideon is acting out revenge for his family. And then he steps it up and acts out bad parenting. He wants his boy to come up, and he wants him to kill these guys, trying to make a man out of his boy. I'm going to have my son kill you. A further insult to them, and also a way for him to turn his boy into a strong leader in front of everybody's eyes. Terrible parenting. He's just a boy. He wants him to kill these kings. And his son wouldn't do it. And good for him. It was terrible parenting. And so he goes and he does it himself. So there's a change that happens in Gideon from the time that he knew from that conversation of the Midianites that God had given the battle into his hand to now. Gideon has become kind of full of himself a little bit. He's kind of went on a rampage. All that anger that he had at the beginning with the Lord is beginning to work itself out. He's taking it out on these kings. He's taking it out on some other Israelites in Succoth and Peniel who didn't help him. And so he's just kind of a loose cannon. You don't know what he's going to do. In verse 32, the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, I do have one request, though, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So Gideon does a really good thing. They said, "Rule over us. Be our ruler. You're a great king. We're going to make you our king. We're going to make you our leader. And not just you, we're going to make it hereditary. Your son and your grandson." They were going to make him king. And Gideon said, "No one's going to rule over you but the Lord." That was a good thing. Gideon said the right thing there. It was absolutely right that he said that. And then he follows it right up with saying, "But I do have a favor to ask." He says, I don't want a lot. I just want one gold earring from each of you." And so all the men gave him a gold earring. Everybody gave him a gold earring, and it was a lot because it was more than 300 gold earrings he got, because it said the weight of it, and the weight in our terms is 43 pounds. 43 pounds of gold earrings were given to him. So not only he did something really good, and then he followed it up with some greed and getting paid for what he did. And it was a payment. And so they gave him this. In today's money, what he got was almost $1 million in today's money, and what gold is worth. And it was an enormous amount of money for him. Enormous payment for what he did. And what did he do with that? What is his legacy? What did he do with that? He did the worst possible thing. He took a portion of that and he made an ephod and he set it up in his town. Now, what's an ephod? An ephod can be one of two different things. It can be an idol that is made, something fashioned by hand. But the way that the Israelites did an ephod is it was a breastplate. It was a breastplate that the priest wore when he was giving offerings and different things. And the way this is indicated here, I don't know which one it is, but it says that he made this ephod out of this gold, and he set it up in Ophrah. And when he set it up in Ophrah, that the Israelites worshipped it. He led them, he made something for them out of their gold earrings, just like Aaron did back years ago when Moses was on the mountain. Exact same scenario. They gave him something and he fashioned this thing out of it, and the Israelites worshipped it. Because they worship it, this is Carl Brown's opinion, this is just my opinion, I think he made some kind of picture of the battle. Some kind of picture of or object that reminded him of the great victory against the Midianites. I don't know what it was. It could have been a picture of Gideon with his hand in the air, or it could have been, I don't know. But it had something that reminded them of that. And then they took that and they worshiped that thing. And after they started worshiping it, he did not tear it down. So Gideon's life just kind of traveled up, kind of at an angle, until he had that moment of clarity, that clairvoyance, that great decision that he made to follow the Lord. And then it kind of went down from there. And when it went down from there, it went down because of pride, because of greed, selfishness, and anger, and revenge. And it just kind of left that beautiful moment. And then he kind of made some good decisions and some bad decisions. And he kind of lived as his leader, because it talks just a verse later about how he did a lot of good things for the people of Israel. Well, he became, because of this gold, he became pretty wealthy. He made this ephod, but it didn't weigh 43 pounds, I don't think. I think he probably used some of that money for his life, because it says that he had many wives and concubines, had a harem on the side. He had 70 sons. 70 sons just from his wives, not including his harem, his concubines on the side. So I don't think he was a strict follower of the Word of God after this. And so he climaxed early, and he did not finish well. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. The lesson that we learn from Gideon is this, is when we trust in the Lord, even in our lack of faith, even with our lack of ability, with God on our side, no one, nothing, and no number of somethings can stand against us. We can always count on the victory with God when we are His vessel. Yet, so often after we have a victory, after God gives us a great spiritual or physical, financial, emotional victory, we can take credit for that victory, and we start feeling awful good about ourselves. We start feeling pretty awesome about who we are, and we forget the Lord that got us there. And we go in a downward spiral. So we'll have a mountaintop experience, and the next thing we know, we find ourselves in a valley. Why are we in the valley? We're in the valley because we took pride in what the Lord had done, instead of just giving glory to the Lord. This happens all the time in our lives. This is a horrible cycle that we get on, that we'll pray and pray and pray about something, and when it happens, it's a wonderful thing. But then suddenly, somehow, some way, we start getting proud of ourselves, and we start remembering back to this great thing that happened in our lives, instead of living the same way that we were when we were praying and climbing the mountain. Now we start just living on our accolades of things we've done in the past. And it can put us in a real bad spiritual situation. And we should always remember that God is the God of I am. He's not the God of I was, or I did, or remember when. He is the God of right now. And so what does He want us to do right now? He wants us to follow Him right now. Trust Him right now. We can do anything with God on our side. Without God on our side, we make terrible decisions. And when we're full of pride and full of ourselves, we leave a terrible legacy. Our legacy should be Jesus. That should be our legacy. Casting Crowns has a great song about it now. If we just focus on always giving Jesus, always giving the Lord credit through our lives and for everything, and make Him the leader of our decisions and the owner of every good thing that we have, then our legacy is secure. There's something that will live far beyond us. And I hope that that's what you want too. And that's the lesson we get from Gideon. Next week, we'll be finishing up Judges. So read the rest of the book of Judges, and next week we'll meet again on Thursday night at 6 o'clock. I hope you've enjoyed this study. If you have, please like it or share it on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll have more people join us. God bless you. Have a great night.